Hey, this is Nathan Dawkin from Fantrax HQ, as well as the NastyCast and Fantrax Dynasty Baseball Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 118, Trading Places, Movie Review. I'm Chris McBrien, along with Caveman Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. You'll find us on Twitter at Amaron_DM for Derek and at C McBrien for me, and popgoesyourworld.com is our website. And if you get a chance, leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show. Derek, what's new in pop culture for you this week?
Hey, Chris. I have had only a little bit of time compared to my normal oodles of time to absorb pop culture. The two things I want to talk about real quick. I had a chance to watch Jack Ryan season 2 on Amazon. Are you familiar with this intellectual property?
Yeah, I think so. Is it like Tom Clancy character?
It's based on the books.
Is it the guy from The Office? Is it who's in it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. So Tom Clancy wrote a whole series of books featuring Jack Ryan. They did a bunch of movies. Harrison Ford played Jack Ryan.
Right.
Ben Affleck played Jack Ryan. I think even Chris Pine, who's Captain Kirk now, played Jack Ryan in one of them. And Alec Baldwin in Hunt for Red October. So the franchise, these characters have been around in pop culture for a while. The guy who was the main guy in The Office is now the lead in this Amazon TV series. Season 1 came and went. Season 2 just dropped. I never watched season 1, largely because I don't really like the guy from The Office who plays Jack Ryan. I mean, I don't dislike him, but I don't really care for him, and I never watched The Office. And season 1 seemed to be more about like turmoil in the Middle East, which not really my bag. Season 2 is more about it takes place in Venezuela, and it's more about political unrest and mining and oil rights in South America. So it seemed a little more up my alley of things I might be interested in, and it was pretty good. The performances were good. There was a lot of actors that were in it that I was like, oh, I totally know who that is. So it wasn't great, but it was good. I would say probably like maybe a C+. Like I was glad I watched it, but I certainly don't think I need to watch it again. And then the other thing I watched on rewatch was...
So before you get into that, I want to talk about this Jack Ryan for a second, because
go for it.
I have a question for you, because I was never a big Tom Clancy guy. I tried to read, I'm going back years now, like probably 25 years ago. I tried to read The Hunt for Red October, and I didn't like it. I found it difficult to get through. It was very technical, and I didn't really enjoy it. That being said, I liked the movie, but I read a book that Tom Clancy wrote called Without Remorse, I think it was called. It was a big, thick book, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm trying to remember if that was Jack Ryan. Do you know?
No, I just like you. My dad actually loved Clancy and owned a whole bunch of his books. So I remember when I was at university,
he was really popular for a while there.
I'll read these. I picked up Patriot Games and tried to get into that. And like you, I couldn't get into it. And I'm a big reader, but it wasn't really hitting the right check marks for me, so I couldn't get into it. I read about halfway through, I put it down. I just couldn't get into the books. The movies I enjoyed enough. Again, not my favorites, but enough people, performers in them that I enjoyed watching that I felt, well, I'll give this a go. But I've seen Hunt for Red October, I've seen Patriot Games, I've seen Clear and Present Danger. I think I've seen them all once, and I'm good with that. So that's why I never jumped on to season 1 of Jack Ryan, but season 2 was pretty good.
Okay. And so what else did you do? You had something else?
So I rewatched one of my favorite movies, The Social Network. Have you seen this? Is the Facebook movie?
Yeah, so this is definitely a millennial thing, but I actually did watch it when it came out, and it was pretty good. I thought it was a pretty good movie, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yancey would be proud of me.
Yes, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts in the last couple of weeks where, because we're coming to the end of 2019, you're starting to get year-end best lists, and now we're getting decade-end best lists, although technically the decade doesn't end until the end of 2020. But for purposes of lists, people are going 2010 to 2019, make a list. And one of my favorite podcasts, they just did there was the 3 people contributing. They all did their top 10 favorite best movies of the decade. And all 3 of them unanimously agreed that The Social Network is the best movie of the last 10 years, which was funny because I just finished watching this, and then the next day I listened to their podcast. So because I had just seen it, I was like, yeah, I'm totally on board with that decision. But I don't know. I'm gonna have to give that one a little more thought. It was good, but I don't know if it was necessarily the best movie. But
I'd have trouble making that top, if we did a top 5 list of the best movies of the last decade. That might actually make an interesting show, because I don't even know if I've seen 5 movies from the last decade.
yeah, that sounds like the right answer from us.
Yeah. So that's me. What can I say?
What about you? Any pop culture happenings in your world? Or are you busy being a dad and a full-time professor as exam season and term paper season is coming in?
Definitely have lots of marking to do as a professor, but as a dad, so you don't have children. But let me tell you something. For those people that listen to this show and actually do have kids, one thing that we like to do, Caveman, us parents, is sometimes you like to torture your kids. And I know that sounds awful, but kids can put you through a lot of torture. So sometimes it's nice to get them back. So tonight, it was just funny. I have to share this story. So tonight we were playing a game of Sorry. So you've heard of this. It's like a board game, right?
Classic board game.
Classic board game.
You to really be aggressive and ruthless with your friends and children and siblings.
Exactly. So we're playing a game of Sorry. And one of the objects of the game is you want to land on someone else's marker because it sends them back to their home. Like it sends them back to their home place. And so every time that we did this, I would sing Bring Him Home from Les Mis. And my kids just started they were almost crying, like, stop, Daddy, no more, stop. And I'm like, so I just thought this was great. I can torture them. And then I would land on my wife's thing, and then I'd be like, bring him home. And then they're like, Daddy, stop. And every single time someone would land on it, I would do it. He's like the sun I might have known. And they're like, stop. I don't know. It's kind of thing. If you're a parent, you understand. Sometimes it's just great. Just great to torture your kids. And so that's what I was doing all night. I was singing this song from Les Mis, Bring Him Home, just to torture my kids. And then another thing, which I'm going to bring up later, having to do with a dad joke. And I just remind me later as we get, because it has to do with the movie that we're reviewing tonight. Okay. But I have another thing that I've just been torturing my oldest son with all week from this movie. So I'm going to try and remember to get into that. But that's what I've been doing. So you got a chance to watch some Jack Ryan and do stuff, and I tortured my kids. That's the way it goes. So what are we going to do?
Just another week in our lives.
That's me. Yep. Okay. On that note, let's hit it. Calm blue ocean, calm blue ocean, calm blue ocean.
There's a lot of wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Smokey and the Bandit shirt review.
I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad. Boof from Teen Wolf.
Hot as a pistol.
Wow, I know. That's pretty amazing.
I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons nerd.
It's a shock that you never got more girls in high school.
Calm blue ocean. Calm blue ocean. Calm blue ocean. I don't know. That's a lot to unpack, Chris. Give me a second here.
Okay, so this week it came over to me to nominate a film, and of course I went back to the 80s, as I am wont to do, and I went back to 1983, picked a movie that I actually am surprised we haven't got to on this podcast yet, because I know I say this almost every time I pick a movie, but it's one of my favorite movies. It was Trading Places from 1983. You seemed like last week when I mentioned it that you were pretty happy with my pick, that I was going to do that. So do you want to get us started off a little bit about the film, and then maybe you can come back to me and I can explain why I picked this movie?
Sure. So yeah, you're right. I had seen this movie before. I liked this movie a lot. I'm a big fan of Eddie Murphy, and I was thinking about this earlier today. I think behind Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2, this would be my third favorite Eddie Murphy movie of all time. I think it probably makes most people's top 3, possibly even their top 1. And this is Eddie Murphy coming into his own, right? They made this movie before 48 Hours was released, but he obviously shot 48 Hours before he shot this one. So you have this young up and coming actor who's already a TV star on Saturday Night Live, has these 2 huge hits, goes on to do Beverly Hills Cop. This is the rise of Eddie. This is Eddie Murphy being Eddie Murphy. He's amazing. You've got a great director. You've got a great script. You've got great co-stars. There's really a lot to like about this movie. And I'd be surprised if you were able to find too many people that disliked it, other than just to say, I don't like Eddie Murphy. Which, hey, if you don't, that's fine. But I think it's a pretty strong movie all around. So for those who maybe haven't seen it before, or haven't seen it in a while, it's the idea is the movie's called Trading Places. Think of it like sort of the Prince and the Pauper idea. You have Dan Aykroyd's character, who is wealthy, from a good family, has a strong education, a really good job. You have Eddie Murphy's character, who is down low life con man, no prospects, criminal record, bad upbringing, all the rest of that. Total stereotypes on both ends. And the two elderly gentlemen that own the exchange, stock exchange that they work for, the firm they work for, decide to make a bet: nature versus nurture. If you were to take someone with the wrong pedigree but put them in the right circumstance, would they thrive? And if you took someone with great pedigree and put them in a terrible circumstance, would they bounce back? And so that's literally what happens. You have the two characters literally trade places. Dan Aykroyd, basically, he goes from being rich to being poor. They besmirch his name. They get him fired. They press charges against him for made up charges, hoping that he will embrace a life of crime to prove the point. And they give Eddie Murphy's character everything he could ever want. They give him a house. They give him a butler. They give him a wardrobe. They give him an expense account. They teach him how to trade stocks. And they make him the executive in a company. And it doesn't take very long for things to happen exactly as these two guys expect that it will. Well, one of them, right? The two guys have a bet. One thinks it'll work and the other won't. And then, of course, hilarity ensues along the way. Yeah, I'm going to sort of stop it from there. Why don't you jump in, Chris? Tell us what you like about it. And
I'll start out by saying why I picked this movie. And the reason why I wanted to go back and watch this movie is because I believe The Trading Places is the forgotten 80s movie. Because I think when you ask people, and if you think and you reflect back on the best movies of the 1980s, particularly the comedies, I think a lot of people forget this one. And it's too bad, because it's probably one of the best, if not the best, comedy from the 80s. And one of the main things that I like about this movie, and the reason why I wanted to nominate it and go back and look at it, like 35 years later, is they do not make movies like this anymore. They don't. You're absolutely right. The idea of the R-rated comedy, it's a dead art form. And that actually brings something to mind I want to share, because the movie rating system itself has undergone some changes over the years that I've been going to the movies. I'm showing my age. Everyone knows I'm old. I remember adult entertainment. Okay, so there was like G, PG, adult entertainment, and restricted. And then, and you could get into adult entertainment movies. Like they weren't very strict, back in those days. And then
Chris, let me interrupt. Now these are the Canadian ratings.
Yeah, I should make this clear. We're in Canada.
My understanding with the adult accompaniment was if you were.
No, this was adult entertainment. 14, it was called adult entertainment.
Right. It was the AA was the rating, adult entertainment. But I believe the subtext of it was, if you were under 14, you had to be accompanied by an adult.
Not exactly.
As opposed to restricted, which was restricted to people 18. Under the age of 18.
Yeah. This is a little different. So this was adult entertainment. Then they came up with the G, PG, adult accompaniment.
Oh, that's when
and R, and that's when you would know. Yeah. And then
I'm not as old as you, Chris.
Yeah, I know. And then, but when they came up with adult accompaniment, you could get into the movie if you were under 18, but you had to have an adult with you. And then I remember they also added PG-13. And they did that because of the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Because it was like too intense for younger viewers. I think I was 11 when I went to see Raiders of the Lost Ark. And honestly, that was a little bit too intense. I was also a bit of a scaredy cat when it came to scary movies when I was a kid. But anyway, in regard to the movie rating system. So this movie came out in 1983. I was 13 years old. And this was when adult accompaniment had come out. So again, you could only get in if you had an adult with you. But I lived in a small town, and they didn't really enforce the rules at the theater all that much. I remember I went to see the movie Bolero with Bo Derek when I was 14. And nobody even asked me. Yeah, I remember. Oh, it was so easy to get in the movies back then. And that movie Bolero, I think, if I remember correctly, I think Olivia Dabo was like nude in it, and she was like young. She was, but anyway, I should not have gotten into that movie. But anyway, like I say, really easy to get in the movies back then in my town. So I went to see Trading Places. I'm 13 years old without an adult to accompany me. If I remember correctly, I think the guy at the box office said, "Well, you gotta have an adult with you." I was like, "Oh yeah, my uncle's just right up there." Oh, okay, go in. It was lax. But should I have seen this movie as a 13-year-old? No. But like I say, it was a bit of a different time then too. But like I say, it was just different times. And we've said that before in this podcast, different kind of movie. But another thing that you touched base on was Eddie Murphy. I'd like to flip that over for a second. And I want to talk about Dan Aykroyd for a second, because at the time that this movie came out, Dan Aykroyd was very closely associated with John Belushi. They were on the original Saturday Night Live cast together. They were in 1941 and the Blues Brothers and Neighbors together. So when Belushi died in March of 1981, this had a big effect on Aykroyd. And not just personally, because it was his best friend, but professionally. And in early 1983, Dan Aykroyd came out with the first movie on his own after Belushi died, and it was called Dr. Detroit. I don't, you know it, right? So you remember that movie? Now, I liked that movie, but
I haven't seen it in 25 years.
Yeah,
I just remember
Doctor Detroit. Yep. And
that's all I remember.
And Smooth Walker. Oh, it was so good. But so I liked it, but like a lot of people didn't. It was like panned by the critics. It bombed at the box office. So it came out in early in 1983. Dr. Detroit did. So I think there was a lot of thought, amongst, people, the audiences, Hollywood types, that Dan Aykroyd couldn't be successful without Belushi. And let's be honest, Dan Aykroyd is not your typical leading man. He's not exactly that sort of traditional type of actor that can carry a film by himself. So just when things are looking like bleak for this guy and for his career, out comes Trading Places. And let me tell you, if you're the type of actor that sort of does better with an on-screen partner, you couldn't do much better than to partner up with Eddie Murphy in 1983, like you mentioned. Trading Places.
Well, think of what he did after this. He went from this, and then he had Bill Murray in Ghostbusters in 1984. Like, you're absolutely right. He plays better as a duo, and he had two of the best in back-to-back years. And that after being with Belushi and the Blues Brothers,
exactly,
and really hit the partner
jackpot. He needed something to spark a change, and Trading Places was exactly what he needed. And because it was a movie that allowed him to work with another actor, so he didn't have to carry the movie by himself. And boy, did it work. And the thing was, he got to work with Landis again, because they had so much success with the Blues Brothers. So for all those reasons, that's why I picked it. You want to talk about some of the elements of the movie itself? I'd like to talk about John Landis for a second. Are you a John Landis fan by any chance?
Well, certainly not to the extent that you are. I am familiar with a lot of his work. I've seen a lot of his work. I've enjoyed a lot of his work. But if you said right now, name as many movies from him as you can, go. I would probably be stuck to name more than two or three off the top of my head. But as you start to go on the list, it's going to be like, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that. So why don't you take it away and throw a few questions to me as we go?
Sure. I loved all of Landis's work, right from Kentucky Fried Movie, through the, Animal House and through the Blues Brothers and things, right up until really, for me, Coming to America. And I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast or not before.
You have.
To me, Coming to America was the last of the sort of classic comedies. It was the last, and not just because it came out in 89, or right at the end of the 80s, I think. It was the last of those kind of movies. After that, they just stopped making them. And it went in a different direction, because the 90s was all about, we've talked about this before, it was all about independent films. And then the movie making changed, right? And then now you've got all this CGI stuff.
Well, and you also got to think of like what was going on geopolitically, right? The fall of the Berlin Wall at the end of 1989 was huge change worldwide in a lot of things, and it changed pop culture. And like you said, also the technology changed as well as we're coming into the computer age, and technology is improving. The way you make movies changes, and as you mentioned before, the independent, you have camcorders, you have people learning, self-teaching, teaching themselves to shoot their own movies at home without going to formal film schools. It changes the medium as the world around them and the technology and the tools change.
Yep. And well, like I say, going back to Landis, one of the things I've always liked about him, there's many, and we'll get into them, but he loves to put elements of his movies into his other movies. So he did it in Twilight Zone, the movie. Like the scene that he directed with Vic Morrow when Vic Morrow's in Vietnam, the scene opens up and there's a bunch of American soldiers walking through this swamp in Vietnam, and one of them says, "We shouldn't have killed Captain Niedermeyer back there." And that was a nod to Animal House, because at the end of Animal House, right before the credits roll, they show the characters are like one by one. They show them on the screen, like of what happens to them in the future. Remember, there's like Senator and Mrs. John Blutarski. And then Niedermeyer, he's the guy that yelled, is that a pledge pin on your uniform? Mark Metcalf played him. And so he was Captain Niedermeyer. And it said at the very end of the movie, killed in Vietnam by his own troops. So that he brings that into his next movie. And he did it again with the Dukes in Coming to America, if you remember. Right. I'm sure you do.
I do.
You know, the scene where Eddie Murphy's character is walking along and hands a bag of money to, this homeless person. And it ends up being, Randolph.
Don Amici.
Yeah. And so, they're back. We're back, Mortimer. And then also another one is Frank Oz, because he's used him in several of his movies. He was in the Blues Brothers and he was also in Spies Like Us.
As a police officer, too.
Yes. He basically recreated his role in this movie. He just did the same shtick. Like where he was going through he went through Belushi's goods at the beginning of Blues Brothers.
One prophylactic, soiled.
Yeah, exactly. One unused, one soiled. And in this, he did the same thing. He goes through all of his stuff, and that's when he's like, one cellophane bag. This is PCP Angel Dust, and there's that whole scene. Yeah. But he was also,
see what this stuff does to kids.
Yeah, exactly. But he was in Spies Like Us too. Remember, he was the instructor
he was
that was
the
like
teacher.
Yeah, he was like proctoring that Foreign Service Board exam with Austin and Emmett, where they're cheating.
Presses the button and the cameras all come out.
So I'm a big Landis fan. Like he was oh man, he was good. And the movie actually did pretty well at the box office. It cost $15 million to make, and it made over $90 million domestically. It was actually fourth for the year in '83, Return of the Jedi being number one. But so it did really well. Although I will say, falling out, I'm just looking at the list from 1983, the movies that did well at the box office. Trading Places finished ahead of War Games and also Octopussy. Just falling outside of the top 10 was Jaws 3D. Unfortunately, didn't quite make it. But Yentl didn't make it either. It was like 18th. But anyway, another thing that I like about this, and Landis too, is this is not, to me, it's more than just a comedy. And you kind of touched base on this. It's a social satire and it's a social commentary.
Absolutely.
And the whole idea, like you mentioned it, it's sort of based on that classic fish out of water archetype. Combined with, you mentioned like Mark Twain's Prince and the Pauper. Yeah. Right? And the idea of the social experiment of nature versus nurture. So, like I mentioned, they just don't make movies like this anymore. And I don't mean that just in regard to the fact that they don't make R-rated comedies anymore. It's more than that. Because I always felt that John Landis sort of created a new genre of film. And I always referred to it as the epic comedy. Because before he came along, comedies were just that. They were just comedies, right? Usually like kind of low budget, no frills storytelling, and they kind of relied on kind of relatively low concept, and situational humor. And John Landis, to me anyway, he seemed to like sort of kick things up a notch. And his comedies are almost bigger than life. If you think of Animal House, and I mean, a lot of it had to do with Elmer Bernstein's score for that movie, because the music was almost like orchestral in nature for Animal House. And I think it confused a lot of people at the time, right? Especially the studio types. Like they didn't know what to make of it. And then, but it worked. And then when Landis went on to make the Blues Brothers, it was like this over the top, bigger than life movie. There's these massive car chases. There's like destruction. There's musical numbers into it. And then here with Trading Places, if you remember, the movie opens up with Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, which is one of the greatest pieces of classical music ever composed. So to me, the whole thing just kind of feels epic. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. But
no, I think that's an accurate way to describe it. I agree with everything you just said. I think that's 100% correct.
I don't know. I really like John Landis, but so there's a lot of things happening in this movie. Like I say, it's more than just a comedy. And one of the themes that I would really like to touch base on now that it's 35 years later, looking back on this movie, is the whole race thing, because the whole plot really involving the Dukes is just mired in racism.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. There are, as we often touch on when we review older movies, there are a lot of things in this movie that are of the day, many of which do not age well. Some things you sort of just hand wave and go, oh, that's how things were. But there are a few, as I was watching it this week, when I went, whoa, I don't remember that. But I'm kind of glad I don't, because that is so wrong for so many reasons.
If you even just take the initial interaction between Winthorpe and Valentine, Winthorpe just assumes he's getting robbed of the payroll. Like when Murphy, he clearly has no intentions of, he just bumps into the guy. He tries to give him the case back. And then it isn't until the cops assume that he's guilty too, and they come after him, that Murphy just instinctively runs away. Yeah. And then if you think of the scene when the Dukes try to get Murphy to come into the limousine, and they're like, whiskey, you know, and
cigars.
And even the dialogue that Murphy gets for his character in that scene, you know, he's like, oh, you're like Randy Jackson from the Jackson 5. And the guy's like, sure. I suppose so. Yeah. And he's like, Morte, what it is, my man. He slaps his hand. Like the whole interaction just smacks of racial stereotypes, right? And then they get Murphy back to their brownstone, right? And he goes in the jacuzzi, and then he's in there and he starts singing. And Randolph Duke says, they're a very musical people, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like the whole thing just, it just smacks of racism. And then when when the Dukes discuss the bet and they're talking about that nature versus nurture, and he's like, well, you know, they refer to Murphy's character. He's like, oh, he's probably been stealing since he could crawl, right? And even that scene later when they're in the bathroom stall, when Murphy overhears them talking, you know, just, I think even the fact that they have Murphy's character sneaking in the bathroom to smoke a joint. Yeah. Like it just comes across as stereotypical, right? And then the Dukes make very clear, like they would never have a black man run their company. And Mortimer even drops the N word to punctuate the point, right?
Yeah.
And Randolph agrees with him. Like the whole thing, I understand. It's designed to make the Dukes into the really bad guys. And it's very effective at that. But for me watching it now, it was more than that. Like I think there's a lot of racial stereotypes at play in the movie. And like you said, it's definitely reflective of the time in which it was made. And obviously one of the best things about this podcast is, you know, it allows us to kind of go back and look at these movies, you know, through the lens of today. But the one thing that I just kept thinking about as I'm watching this movie, and I've made this point in the past with Yancey, and I'm going to make it again here, is how much has really changed. Like, I'm a huge optimist. You know, I'm really open-minded and sort of very liberal in my belief system, but I'm also realistic enough to realize that the world hasn't gotten all that much better in the last 35 years. And to be honest, judging with what I'm seeing happening lately, you could argue that it's actually regressed. It's actually gotten worse over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too political, I think you definitely can make a strong argument for that. One of the things I want to sort of touch on that you brought up was Don Amici's character. Well, Don Amici, the actor. So in preparation for this movie, as I often do when we do these, I read through the trivia on the IMDb, and it talked about how towards the end of the movie, he has to use the F word. When they're like, he's like, your brother's having a heart attack. And he's like, oh, F him.
Yep.
Apparently, again, you can never know if the internet is accurately and true, but it said, due to his strong religious beliefs, he didn't want to use curse words. And apparently in his real life, he didn't. And so when they wanted him to say the F word on screen as a part of this scene in this character, there was initial resistance. And when talked into it, he said, okay, I will do it once and only once. So you better get it on camera because I am not doing it again. I'm only going to say the word one time because I am a professional. I will do it because it's in the script. That was sort of the gist of it. So he's got a hard time because of his religious beliefs saying the F word, but he has no problems using the N word.
I know.
And again, I think that it is definitely of its time. But to your point, I think that there's a lot of people today that might be the same way. It's like, I will, that would feel comfortable. They shouldn't, but they do, saying, one thing but not the other. And it's like, it seems so hypocritical. It's like, if you've got a list of words you won't say, why are these words on it and these words not? It just seemed, I don't know. I don't know if I'm pulling a Yancey. I'm rambling, and I don't know if I'm making my point.
I agree with you 100%. I don't know what, and again, we're not here to be political or to challenge people's belief systems, but what belief system do you have where you're like, no, you know what? I'm just too principled to use the F word, but I'm fine with the N word. Like, what the heck
racism is okay, with but you? Swears are not.
Jeez, I don't know. Again, it just me. But and that's what I like about this podcast. We can look back on this movie from 35 years ago. and look at it through a different lens. And I certainly am, because I mean, I liked this movie a lot, and I watched it many, many times. I had it on VHS. I've seen it a bazillion times. It's been years since I've seen it. And to take a look at it now, like, I realize, like, just first of all, how good of a film it is, how I believe it holds up as a film. And I think you really hit it too, is it's got a great script. So it really, really holds up. But there's certain elements of it that just kind of make you, just kind of wonder. And like I say, I think a lot of it was, intentional to make the Dukes, unlikable. But some of it too was just kind of very stereotypical. And racial stereotypes are not the only stereotypes that show up in this movie either, because if you think about it, the rich people are seen as sort of sophisticated, and poor people are supposed to be beneath them. But in fact, and the movie does play it up, that the truly good people in this movie are the non-rich people. Like, if you think about it, Ophelia,
the prostitute,
she takes him in. Right? Yep. She's the only one that's nice to him. And Valentine is actually smart and savvy and has really great business instincts. And Ophelia, too, she's a really smart businesswoman. Remember, she invests all her money in, like, securities. She's got all this cash. And like I say, both of them are good and decent people, and they're willing to help other people out. Whereas the Dukes and Winthorpe's fiance and his quote-unquote friends, they're all just selfish jerks, right? So,
well, think of it this way, Chris. Let's use you and I as an example. Mm-hmm. You fall in some hard times, and you're charged with a crime, and for whatever reason, your family is unable or unwilling to help you out, and you come to my door. I'm not going to turn you away simply because you've been charged with a crime, even if I think you did it. You're my friend. I'm going to try and help you in any way that I think I can. And I think that the movie does a very good job of demonstrating just how shallow the friendships are with the people that are represented as being the upper class. It's like they have this shared pedigree. They've gone to school together. They work together. They all are, it seems to be sort of in the same socioeconomic bracket where they can enjoy the same privileges that you would have from having or coming from money. But it doesn't seem like there's even that strong emotional connection. It just seems so shallow. And I think that's part of the point of the movie, is to make that comment. And just like you said, it shows that those that don't necessarily have money have to rely on other things to go about their day. You need to rely on your friends. You need to do what's right. You need to have this strong moral compass. You look at the hooker. Yeah, what she's doing professionally is illegal, but she talks about how, I've done this job, I've got a few more years left, and then I've invested well, and I'm going to retire, and I'm going to live my life. And it's like she's got a plan, and she's doing it for a reason. And it's, again, I think it's a very deliberate commentary on the class system. So you've got, in the movie, they make a point of pointing out the differences between the races, the classes, the those with and without money. It's this very diametrically opposed script where you have all these comparable things that continue to be flipped upside down through the course of the film. And in many cases, it's done for laughs, but it still makes a good point. And probably by playing it for laughs, it almost makes a stronger point, because you laugh at the absurdity of the extreme, but by doing that, it really hits home what the point is.
Absolutely, I agree. And another theme that we've kind of touched base on too is the whole bet, right? Like the whole nature versus nurture thing. And obviously, they play it, for comedic value too, because it's like the usual amount. Which you expect to be this huge sum because they're mega rich. But I love the fact that they get Clarence Beeks. By the way, the absolutely masterful Paul Gleason in this role. Mm-hmm. To obviously, like, he's the one that slips the bills in the Winthorpe's jackets, so they can frame them and all that kind of thing. But oh man, he was fantastic in this. I read somewhere that G. Gordon Liddy was actually pegged to play that part, and he was all ready to play the part. I mean, he was not an actor, obviously. I mean, he broke into Watergate, but he was going to play the part. And then when he got to the script where later in the movie where the gorilla, remember they dress him up in the gorilla suit and they leave him in there, and the male gorilla violates him, we'll say. When he read that, he says, "I'm not doing that." And they said, "Well, it's in the script." They say, "I'm not doing it." So he came out and they brought Paul Gleason. And there's a scene where Paul Gleason is actually reading Will by G. Gordon Liddy. I think is a little tip to him for that. But very interesting.
Nice.
A couple scenes in the movie I wanted to touch base on.
Yeah, for sure. There's a few I want to touch on too. Go ahead, you start.
I'll start with one. When they're, I laugh at this every time I watch this movie. And like I say, it's been 25 years probably since I've seen it. When they're haggling at the pawn shop with Bo Diddley. And
yeah.
Oh, and he plays the guy at the pawn shop, and he has the best voice ever, I swear. So Winthorpe is trying to sell him his watch, and he's like, "Burn my fingers, man."
Yeah.
Are you implying that this watch is stolen? He's like, "I'll give you $50 for it," and he's like, "It's handcrafted in Switzerland. It's water resistant to 3 atmospheres." Like, it tells time simultaneously in like Beverly Hills, London, Paris, Rome, and Stade. In Philadelphia, it's worth $50. I love that. I'll take it. How much for the gun? There's something about that whole scene. I just laugh from beginning to end. I love that scene. What's a scene that stands out for you? I've got a couple.
Let me tell you. So, in my mind, I watched this movie this week. I hadn't seen it in a long time. I remembered lots of the broad strokes of this movie because there's a lot of memorable scenes and a lot of memorable dialogue. One of the things that I didn't realize until this viewing was that the movie takes place primarily in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Because the end of it takes place at the New York Stock Exchange. I just assumed it took place in New York. So when I started watching it and it's showing all these scenes of what I learned later was Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's got the Liberty Bell. Yep.
Well, I'm watching it and sort of through my mind, I'm thinking, wow, this is, a real time capsule of what urban America was like in the early 1980s. You could see, the cabs, the buses, the what people were wearing, just the way the various store signs looked. Like it's a real time capsule. And it wasn't until I saw the statue of Rocky that I'm like, well, that's definitely not in New York.
Right.
And then I sort of was paying closer attention. I'm like, oh, it must be Philly. And then it shows I think it was Pennsylvania Railroad. And I was like, oh, okay, well, definitely Philly then. And, again, you just assume, or I just assumed that, like so many other movies, it took place in New York. So that was one thing that caught my attention right away. So I want to talk about a problematic, well, not so much a problematic scene, but something that really jumped out at me.
Okay.
So towards the end of the movie, they get on the Amtrak and they do the whole switcheroo with the briefcase.
Yeah.
And all the characters are in various disguises.
Yes. Oh, God.
Which surprised me a little bit because I was thinking to myself, well, if it was Beeks that had the report, right?
Yes.
But he'd never seen. He knew who Winthorpe was, but did he know the other character? Like, I didn't understand where they were all dressed up. It's like he wouldn't know who they were.
Yes. So yes, he knew Ophelia. Remember, he is the one that paid Ophelia at the beginning of the movie to go and to kiss Winthorpe in front of his fiance.
But she had the red wig on, and she was, looked like a street walker.
But still, she didn't want to be recognized by him.
Well, I don't think her disguise really changed her appearance very much.
That's part of the comedy.
Focuses attention on her test rather than on her face. Sure.
And because he was working for the Dukes, and because Eddie Murphy's character Valentine had taken over the business for the Dukes, he would be worried about being recognized. And because he obviously would know Winthorpe, and would probably know Winthorpe's butler as well. Yeah, so they were all kind of at risk of being recognized by him.
That was sort of my first thing. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, so you want to come into these disguises. And I like the way they sort of the script is written that it's this party train on New Year's Eve where everyone's, although it's not Halloween, it's like Halloween where everyone's dressed up in costume. So, okay, that's great. Dress up in a costume. But then it was
like a New Year's party.
New Year's party.
And they were all dressed up.
But then I was thinking, I'm like, are Eddie Murphy's character and the butler's character supposed to be in costume? Because it didn't seem like they were. It seemed like they were just people that were
playing those characters, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, speaking to the racial stereotypes, especially Eddie Murphy, like that just seemed a little bit too much of the nail on the head with that one.
Oh, Miguel from Cameroon. Oh, yes, the Haile Selassie Pavilion. Oh, yes.
Yeah, you play it for laughs. Dan Aykroyd shows up as in blackface as a Jamaican, and I was like, oh, dude. I'm like, really? And this is a real sign of the times that in 1983 you can do this and people laugh. Yep. And I'm sure not every single person was laughing. I'm sure there were certainly people who were offended by it, but it just the masses, the white masses of North America were like, this is funny. Let's put this in the movie. And You absolutely couldn't do that today. I mean, look at the Canadian Prime Minister. He did that at a Halloween party a decade ago, and during the election, this thing comes out, and it's this scandal. Like, oh my God! So that jumped out at me. I did not remember that at all, but it made me cringe just to watch it. Mm-hmm. It was very awkward to go back and see. And I mean, again, sign of the times. At the time, I can't believe that anyone making that movie felt there was anything wrong with it. They probably just felt that, hey, this is going to be a funny scene, let's do it. And it was so over the top, you could see it wasn't done out of racial insensitivity, but that's no excuse. So it's
there's a line that I really like in that scene when he's talking about the beef jerky. He's like, beef jerky time, beef jerky. Yeah. You want some beef jerky? He's like, no, there's plenty, I don't know why, just the way he delivers that line. There's plenty, I said that to my son just this week. I was like, you want this? He's like, no. I said, oh, there's plenty, And he's like, what are you talking about, Daddy? I'm like, I watched this movie for the podcast. Never mind. Which kind of brings me into this point, because I mentioned earlier about how I was torturing my kids.
Yes.
And so I said, because I just watched this movie this week. So I said to my son, he's 10 years old. You know my son. You met him. So I said,
wait, you didn't let him watch this with you? You didn't want to see Jamie Lee Curtis in all her glory?
No. That'll be another scene we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay.
But so I said to my son, I said, I said to my son, I said, you know what I want to do? I got to go, and I'm going to go get some paint. I'm going to get red paint. He's like, oh, what are you going to do with the red paint, Daddy? I said, I'm going to paint the truck, because we have like an SUV, right? Like a Toyota. And he goes, what are you going to paint it? You're going to paint the whole truck? I said, no. I'm not going to paint the whole thing. I'm going to paint a big red S on the side of it. And then I'm going to paint a big red S on the other side of the truck. And then I'm going to paint a big red S on the top. And he's like, why would you do that? I said, so when I drive down the street, people will say, look at that S car go. And it's from this movie, right? There's a scene where they do that.
Yeah.
And he's like, Daddy, that's the worst dad joke I've ever heard in my life. Never say it again. He's like, oh my God. He's like, I'm so embarrassed. That's the worst dad joke ever. So then even tonight at dinner, we're just finishing up dinner. I said, son, I got to go. And he's like, what do you got? I got to go to the store. And he's like, why? I said, I got to go buy red paint for the truck. He's like, Daddy, stop. And then, of course, that led right into the game when I started singing, bring him home. So it was great. So I wanted to get into the scene. You mentioned Jamie Lee Curtis's scene.
Yes.
Because, of course, no 80s R-rated comedy. Would be complete.
You need to show some boobs.
without that obligatory nude scene, right? And it really sort of seemed to be a standard part of all these movies back then. But the thing with Jamie Lee Curtis, even at the time, it was a little surprising that she did this scene, because it's not like she was like a struggling actress who needed the work. She was well established because of her roles in Halloween and Prom Night and Terror Train. Yeah. And also, not only that, she's basically Hollywood royalty. Her mom was Janet Leigh from Psycho, and her dad was Tony Curtis. So the fact that she would sort of come out, with already having an established career and do a nude scene, I think it was a little shocking to some people. Don't you agree?
Well, again, I can't speak to how it was at the time, but watching it now, it just, like so many of these other movies, I expected a nude scene. I knew the nude scene was in there. But watching it now, it's like the nudity added nothing to the scene. You could have had that scene be every bit as effective as it was, because she basically covers herself up and then turns around and delivers the dialogue. You could have easily recut that scene in such a way that you never actually see the front, and then when she does turn around, she's covered up, and the scene would not have been any different. I don't think it would have been any less powerful. Like so many of these nude scenes we talk about in some of these older movies, it's simply there to be a gratuitous nude scene, to get young boys, young men into the theater. Well, not even necessarily young men into the theater. Just another reason to sell a ticket. Come on in, see Jamie Lee Curtis take her shirt off. Which, in today's lens, I think maybe that's reason for it.
But maybe that's what made this one. Sorry, maybe that's what made this one different, though. Maybe that's what made this one stood out, because unlike all the other 80s movies that just had the gratuitous scene in there, like you said, this one was a little bit more shocking because it was Jamie Lee Curtis. Maybe that was it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, hey, she had a phenomenal body, and if she wanted to show it off, and assuming that there wasn't pressure to do it, she chose to do that. Hey, power to her. I've heard women say, women performers say that, well, I chose to do this because it was empowering, and I'd like to think that was the reason she did it. I don't know, but if it was, great.
I would say it changed her career because she was known as sort of the scream queen up until then with these horror movies. But after this, then she did a movie with Travolta called Perfect, and it was about somebody that had a perfect body. So I think she was kind of then pegged as being like, this person with this unbelievable body. And then also in True Lies.
I was going to say True Lies, yeah.
I think came directly from this.
Although there's no nudity in that,
no,
but it is.
But it came
there's
from
an example. There's an example of how you can take a performer who is very physically attractive and wants to, again, I assume, wanted to take this role, to do this scene, perform it in the way she did. It's very erotic, very sexy, but there was no nudity. And I think if that movie had been made 10 years earlier, she would have had no top on. The scene would have been shot probably exactly the same way. They would have just said, take the top off. But mid-90s, you make this movie and it's not necessary. And she's not wearing a lot of clothes. She's, still very, very she has a lot of skin showing. But I think it speaks to the fact that you don't have to have the female performer be naked to make the scene work. The scene can work. Yeah. And in True Lies, it certainly did.
No, that's a good point. The last scene that I want to talk about is the last scene in the movie. It's a stock exchange. And there's always sort of existed some confusion about exactly what happens here. It's basically one of the most frenzied and, quite frankly, I would say realistic climaxes, in just about any movie I've ever seen. But it's also a scene that confuses the hell out of a lot of people. And K-Ben, I understand you're a bit of a stock market expert, and you can maybe help shed some light on exactly what happens in this part of the movie. Would you like to try to tackle this for us?
So not so much a stock market expert as much as I'm a big gambler. And who are we kidding? The stock market is essentially gambling. It's just a different kind of gambling.
Sure is.
So put in its most simple way. So before I do any of this, I may not do the best job of explaining this. I may confuse people more than they're already confused. I would encourage anyone who really just has no idea what happened, and after my rant here, still is confused, to go to the IMDb page for Trading Places. In the trivia section, somebody has written an excellent description, scene by scene, sort of how this end plays out and how it worked and why it worked and the ups and the downs. And I've read it a couple of times. It's a little bit long for a single piece of trivia, but it is quite detailed. And whoever did this clearly wrote it and rewrote it a few times to make sure that it was right. So if you're not sure, go to the IMDb, but I'll try and explain it. So essentially, Dan Aykroyd's character even says it, and you've heard this mantra before: buy low, sell high. Mm-hmm. That's the objective when it comes to any transaction, right? Buy low, sell high. You're going to make money. And in a nutshell, that's what they do, except they do it in the reverse order, where they actually sell high before they actually have anything to sell.
Right.
And then later in the movie, when the prices start to plummet, they buy because they know basically what's happened is the movie, the scene takes place on or after New Year. I think it's January 2nd. If I remember, or it's between Christmas and New Year's.
Right. No, it's just in the New Year. Yeah.
Right. Because they did the New Year's Eve train thing. So,
exactly.
So in January, they say that in April, we will be selling orange juice at a set price. I think it was $1.42. And at the time, we don't yet know if there will be a lot of orange juice available or a little bit of orange juice available. And so the Dukes have one idea of how it's going to work because they've seen what we learn is a false report. And Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd actually know it's in total insider trading. They would totally go to jail for this if they were ever caught. But they have the inside scoop. They actually know. It's like betting on a fixed sports event, right? If you already know the outcome, of course you're going to bet on the right side of this deal. And that's basically what they're doing.
That was the whole scene on the train, right? Clarence Beeks had the crop report, which was going to say that it was going to be a normal crop, good crop.
Yeah. So the Dukes were assuming, I got to think, the Dukes, the report the Dukes had said that the crop would be ruined and there would not be a lot of orange juice available come April. Right. So their instruction to their guy was, in January, buy as much as you can, because in April there won't be a lot available, and
The price is going to be high.
If there's only a little bit to be had, we can sell it for as much as we want. So even though it might look like we're buying it at a high price now, we're going to be able to sell it at an even higher price 3 months from now. And of course, these guys realize that that's not going to be the case. So they set a price, 142. They said, in 142, we're going to sell these at this price, and even though they don't at the time have any. And they start taking the deals. And then later on in the movie, when the stock starts to plummet, after the actual report comes out and says, no, there will be just as much available in April as there is today. There's not going to be any sort of a shortage. There's going to be plenty. So don't overpay for it. So everyone starts selling, because they're like, well, crap, if it's going to be cheap, I don't want to be holding it if it's $1.42. They start selling. And again, supply and demand. With so many people selling, the price plummets. And when it hits rock bottom, the two heroes say, okay, in April, we're going to need to have some orange juice. Now that it's cheap, let's buy some. So they do that, buy low, sell high, but they do it in the reverse order, which in the stock market you can totally do. However, and this is pointed out in the trivia, not really so much pointed out in the movie, in order for you to make these trades, in order for you to say, I'm going to sell you product X at this price in a future date, you are required to pay a certain small percentage of the whatever quantities you say you're going to have at the time, which is why you see Ophelia and the butler give them their life savings at the beginning.
That's how they finance it. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's like, well, why would they need the money up front if they don't have to sell it until April? That's why. That's the way the stock market works. Nothing is free. The stock market itself takes their cut. The brokers take their cut. They acquire future sales of the orange juice. They say in April, we're going to sell this much at this price, and everybody jumps on board. And then when they find out there is not going to be any sort of shortage of supply, people freak out and they just try and get rid of what they got. So that's what ends up. And I think it ends at, I can't remember what the final stock
29 cents. If I can kind of add to what you've said, because you've really put it together well. But the idea is that, the floor starts to see the Dukes buy. So they think something's up, right? The Dukes know something. Yeah, they know they're trying to corner the market. So everybody thinks it's going to go sky high, like, over $2 or something like that. So then that's when Winthorpe and Valentine come in and they say, we'll sell in April for $142. And everyone's like, yeah, because we think it's going to be way over $2. We'll do it. We'll buy from you in April at $142, no problem. It's called short selling on the floor, right? But the key thing is you got to wait for the right time, because if the price goes too high, they're going to owe the floor a lot of money, right?
Yeah, it's that small percentage. But if you're going to potentially owe hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of units at $1.42, even 10% of that price is going to be enormous.
Oh, yeah, they're going to owe the floor.
One thing that I think the movie sort of glosses over, rightly so, but I think people misunderstand, is the events at the end take place at the starting bell at, I believe it's 9 o'clock or 9:30. I think it's 9 o'clock. Starting bell. Then an hour later, the stock report comes out. So it goes from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, or it goes from 9:30 to 10:30. But the exchange don't close until much later in the day, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, somewhere in that ballpark. So what wasn't apparent to me until many viewings later is we don't see that they continue to buy, and then sell over the course of like 6 hours. Like, time passes that we don't actually see. It's not just, the stock report comes out, you've got 20 minutes to sell this, which is sort of what the movie implies, that it's like, the reports came out, you've got a very short window to move these. I think the implication here is when the bell goes and the trading stops, that's the end of business day. Like, there has been a tremendous amount of activity buying and selling. And this is old school before computers, right? So this is physical paper chits where you're writing down the stockbroker's number and the amounts and who they represent, and you see them all with the hand signals, like I'm buying this many and at this. So that's one thing that's just a small detail that as I've started to understand a little bit more about how this sort of big thing comes together, this big climax at the end, is that there is a significant passage of time that is sort of glossed over.
And that's why they got to wait for the right time too, because not only do they need to wait for the right time before the price goes too high, but they also need to leave enough time to book those orders. Yes. Because like you said, they got to do it manually, right? And then they obviously, everybody wants to oh man, yeah, we'll buy it from you for $1.42 in April. Here we are, we buy it. And then of course, like you said, the crop report comes out and, oh no, it's fine. So then, the price is not going to go sky high. We need to sell, right? And then they just start buying it and the price goes down. So the key is to buy it low, like you said. So they had to buy it for like 29 cents. So they're basically buying for 29 cents now, but they're selling it in April at $1.42. So they're rich. Big time rich. And the Dukes are poor. But not only do they have to make sure the Dukes are poor, like they squeeze the guy out from even selling just to sort of doubly screw him over. Yeah. They don't even buy them back from the Dukes, right?
Yeah.
And then, like you said, they use Ophelia's and Coleman's money too, I think, to finance the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's when I was younger watching that, I sort of understood the whole you're buying low, selling high, but the idea that they do it in the reverse order always confused me. It wasn't until many years later when I started, like I work for a bank, not that I deal with the money, I work in communications, but that I started to get an understanding of, oh, okay, this is what's happening. Because then at the end, the exchange guy comes over to the Dukes and says, okay, margin call. And basically what he's saying is we need a percentage of all of these orange juice shares that you said you were going to buy.
Oh, yeah, you owe the floor. Yep, you got to pay the floor.
Money. Yep. Yeah, and they're like, well, we don't have that much money. And that's when they're like, well, we're going to seize your assets, sell your seats on the exchange, and you're done.
Yep.
There's going to be a lawsuit here. And and they literally they're broke, right? Which is what does Valentine say earlier? He's like, the best way to get back at rich people is turn them into poor people. And they reveal they have that, again, this parallel scene where he's like, I bet him that, we couldn't get rich and put you all in the poorhouse at the same time. I lost. Here's the payout, $1.
It's $1. And that's
just to rub it in, like we know.
And that's one of the best parts, though, for the end, because then you realize that the title, Trading Places, is not just, Winthorpe and Valentine trading places, but really at the end of the movie, they trade places with the Dukes. Right. So that's very gratifying for an audience to experience that, needless to say. But also the title, to me, also means trading places. Like, it's the floor of the exchange. This is where this is a place we're trading
to make trades. Yes.
So, I mean, what a great title. So good. It's descriptive. It's everything. I don't know. Great movie. Out of 10, what would you give it?
Probably an 8, maybe 8, 8.5. Probably, definitely 8. No lower than 8, but I could probably be talked into giving it an 8.5.
I would definitely go 8.5 as well.
Yeah, it sort of loses a tiny bit for me just because of some of the
passage of time.
The unnecessary nudity, the racial insensitivity. But looking at it as sort of a piece of art of its time, it's got so many other good things going for it. Yeah, I think a solid 8, no question.
From an entertainment point of view, it is definitely right up there. And like I said, for me, I believe it's one of the forgotten movies of the 80s. And when you come back and you watch it again, you realize just how good it is. But that's our thought. Anyway, on that note, let's have some
fun with Caveman.
All right, Derek, since I nominated the film, it's over to you. So I think I should probably open up a beer and enjoy myself here and sit back and relax. So that's what I will do. I don't know if that's
going to help you or hurt you here this time, bud.
I'll do my best. What have you got for me this week?
Okay, so I decided to, as we often do with our trivia segment here, I decided to try and change it up just a little bit.
Okay.
I've learned over the years that asking you trivia about the movie that you love and that you nominate is sort of a futile effort. You're going to know all the trivia points. In fact, a lot of the trivia points that I might have asked you brought up during the course of our discussion.
Yancey
as you
often say that,
used to with Yancey. So we always try and skew the trivia just a little to the left or the little to the right, just to keep it off center and keep it interesting. But I will say you did answer some of the questions I have in this trivia during the course of our dialogue. So this section might be a little easier for you than I would. Yes. I didn't think it would be overly difficult, but I think you might find it even a little bit easier because I think we've already touched on some of the answers. So
yes, I like that.
Trading Places came out. Remind me again, what year did this movie come out?
1983, my friend.
Okay, 1983 was a pretty good year for movies. And I know you're a big 80s guy, a big 80s movies guy.
I am.
And so I thought, you know what? Let's take a look at movies from 1983.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Just 1983. And there were a lot of great movies. There were a lot of crappy movies, but there were a lot of great movies in 83.
Yeah, I think there probably was.
Pretty good movies. A lot of movies that have stood the test of time. A lot of movies people go, oh, I've seen that. Or you say, hey, would you be interested in what? Yeah, for sure. No problem. So I've got a list of 40 or 50 movies here from 1983.
Oh, God. Okay.
I have very brief one-sentence descriptions of these movies. I'm going to give you 60 seconds, and I'm going to need you to be the timekeeper on this one. Actually, no, I'll be the timekeeper.
You be the timekeeper. Okay.
Yep.
I got it.
Our, mobile phones, the wonder of the world here. I've got a timer right in my pocket. So let me get a timer going here. We're all ready for that. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I'm going to read you the one-sentence description of a movie.
Okay.
If you know it, shout it out. If you don't know it, just say pass, and I'll go on to the next one.
Deal.
We will not come back to anything you missed, simply because I have way more movies on my list than we would ever need to go back to.
Okay.
And
we'll see how many I get in 60 seconds. Is that the idea?
Yeah. Do you have any guesses? How many? Keep in mind, it's going to take me a few seconds to read each question, but how many? Just before we get started, if we were betting on this, what would you put the over and under at? What do you think is sort of that middle ground for where you're going to land?
10.
10. Okay, so let's say I'm going to set the line at 10.5.
Okay.
If we were betting, would you go over 10.5 or under 10.5 to get that many correct?
This is going to be hard, and you got to read. I'll go under 10.
Okay, so Chris is putting his money on under 10. I think that's probably a pretty accurate line. I'm going to take the over just to be on the other side of that. And in your favor, there are a couple of descriptions that I have deliberately tried to make more challenging, because to give you the real description from the IMDb, it would be so obvious.
Right.
But for the most part, I tried to keep them pretty much in line with what, like, my objective here is not to stump you. I want you to get as many as you can, but I will tell you there are a few quote unquote trick questions in here, which we will come back to afterwards.
Okay.
If you don't get. So I'm just going to read it. You yell out the answer. I'll say correct or not. We'll move on. Just say pass if you don't know, and I'll go on to the next one. And these are in no particular order. I'll tell you, how I did. I put the list of 50 movies together. I went into Excel. I created a random number generator, and I said resort the movies. So
all right.
There's no rhyme or reason as to the order of these. Don't let that factor into it. So are you ready?
Okay.
60 seconds on the clock. Go. A test pilot flies an experimental police helicopter.
Blue Thunder.
Correct. A boy buys a strange car with an evil mind of its own.
Christine.
Correct. A timid college professor poses as a flamboyant pimp.
I don't know.
Pass. A Pittsburgh woman working 2 jobs as a welder and an exotic dancer wants to go to ballet school.
Flashdance.
Correct. A 35-foot shark becomes trapped in a SeaWorld theme park.
Jaws 3D.
Correct. A young man's terrorist friends destroy a government installation while he focuses on reconciliation with his father.
Pass.
A Chicago teenager opens a brothel in his suburban home.
Risky Business.
Correct. A determined Cuban immigrant takes over a drug cartel and succumbs to greed.
Scarface.
Correct. 2 stoners pose as Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds when they visit Amsterdam.
Pass.
Canada's most famous hosers get a job at a local brewery.
Strange Brew.
Correct. Richard Pryor creates a synthetic material that turns the greatest hero in the world evil.
Superman 3.
Correct. 7 former college friends gather
The Big
for
Chill.
a weekend
The Big Chill.
reunion. Correct. And we're overtime. Sorry, I wasn't watching the times.
So how many did I get?
Big Chill. So in a minute and 10 seconds, let's see. Okay, I'll read down the list. I think you got most of them. Blue Thunder, you got. Christine, you got. This one I'm surprised you didn't get because we talked about it. A timid college professor becomes a flamboyant pimp is Dr. Detroit.
Oh, Jesus. Yes, right.
Flashdance, you got. Jaws, you got. Okay, this was a trick question, which is why I made sure it was in there early. A young man's terrorist friends destroy a government installation while he focuses on reconciliation with his estranged father.
Don't know.
It was the top grossing movie of the year.
Return of the Jedi?
A young man's terrorist friends destroy a government installation while he focuses on reconciliation with his estranged father.
Oh, that's crazy.
I knew that one would stump you.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it did.
Risky Business. Did you get Risky Business?
Yes, I got that one. Yeah.
Brothel, okay. Yeah. Scarface, you got. Cheech and Chong still smoking. 2 stoners poses Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds.
Smoking came out.
Strange Brew, you got. Superman 3, you got. The Big Chill, you got. So let me see how many is that here. That's we did go a little over the clock on that one, but there was 12. I think you missed 2, so you got 10 right on the line.
Hey, so I got it. So I got the under.
The line, Chris.
Oh
Nice.
man, right on. I tell you, oh my gosh, that was really hard, man. Especially when the clock's ticking like that. Oh man, the pressure is on. I tell you what we'll do is we'll come back next week with a top 5 list because we've done 2 movies now in a row, so that's sort of next up on our list. We'll come back and do that. I will throw this out there if you enjoy listening to the podcast, and if you have any suggestions for topics or movies or especially top 5 lists that you'd like to, see us do here on the show, reach out to us on Twitter at Amaron_DM is for Derek, at at cmcbrien, you can reach me. popgoesyourworld.com. You can email us on there. But until next week when we do our top 5 list, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.